All right, so now we're going to open the floor to our audience. Just a gentle reminder that for you guys who want to ask questions, to go to slido.com. That's SLIDO.com. And you can put in our event code, which is H037, and you can put in your questions here. So we have quite a few already. Let's start with something, I guess, more general about startups, but kind of a hot topic at the moment. Maybe this is more for Gustaf first. Someone in the audience asked, what's your view of startups in relation to the latest WeWork valuation issue?
Everyone in Silicon Valley loves to say that WeWork is a New York company. Well, the one thing about fundraising you should know is that a fundraising is not a market in the sense that everybody got a chance to invest. Fundraising is that one investor invested at one valuation from one company, which means that there's a high chance that could be inflated for a number of motivations. So it's not the market price. So there's a private price, which is based on a buyer and a seller, and then there's a public price, which is based on many buyers and many sellers. They don't have to be the same, and I think it's sort of like in the description that they don't have to be the same. Now, there's a reason the corporate governance was set up the way it is, and in the last 5 or 10 years, some founders have the reason the founders were trying to gain advantages was because in the 90s, they were pushed out by the investors. So in the 90s, if you were a technical founder and you start a company, you would grow the company to Series B, and then the investors would go and say, well, actually, we think we need a real CEO. And they told that to Mark Andreessen, who invented Netscape and Opsware. And they told him, he's like, we need a real CEO. And then the investor got a real CEO to the company. And the same happened with the Google. The Google founders, they needed a real CEO. It's like Eric Schmidt. He was great. They were both great. The things, but there was that was the culture at the time, is that the investors will force on you another person who had. But how are you going to be experienced to be a CEO if you're not allowed to be a CEO? So that was the background through which the founders started to push for more rights and push for more security on their shares, rightfully so. But I think it went too far in the other direction. So now we have founders that are pushing for those rights at the expense of employees and at the expense of other shareholders, and that's obviously bad. So it's going to have to be a balance between the founders making all the calls and the investors making all the calls. And I don't have a great answer exactly how that should look like. I don't want to go into the details of Facebook, but I think it's better for Facebook that Mark is CEO than someone else is CEO. I think if you think of that company and what they're trying to achieve, I think he would do a better job, and most founders would do a better job than other CEOs that you put in down the line. So no founder is going to have majority ownership at some point. Like they're going to all lose it, and investors often haven't ran companies, so they don't really know what it means to replace a founder with some professional CEO. And statistically, I think that's a huge mistake. And statistically, I think founder CEOs tend to perform a lot better. But the investors are not rational when they don't actually look at the statistics. So I think, I don't know, this is a complicated issue, but I think it's very clear that there was a lot of wrongdoings in WeWork.
So that was a bit of a hot topic. Let's come back to why we're all here, which is to get to know Y Combinator a little bit better. There's a question from the audience about being an Indonesian startup and joining YC. Maybe Rohit, you can start with that. So what is the benefit of an Indonesian startup to join YC?
Well, I don't think the benefit is very different from a US startup joining YC. Essentially, the value of YC is the network. It's the accountability that they hold you to while you're there for 3 months. Being locked away in the middle of nowhere helps you to just focus. You don't really have anything else to do. So it's essentially the ability and the focus and the time boxing of what you need to achieve. You need to hit your goal by demo day, and those goals are set pretty early on. And you have really smart people to kind of talk to and hold you accountable that actually are deeply understand your business. Like I've had, I think, at least 5 to 10 conversations with Gustaf, one-on-one for over an hour just about our business alone. So I think you don't get the partnerships that the US companies have per se, unless you're a SaaS company, for example, or serving that market. But all the other benefits that David talked about and I just mentioned are still there.
Well, I think for Indonesian companies, you have the benefit of learning a strategy from a fellow company who serve the same emerging countries like ours. Because surprisingly, we face the same problem. The market is similar, so you know what you're going to face.
Okay, and maybe this is a question again about the YC program that Gustaf, you may be able to answer. Is there criteria related to years of a startup's inception, or would you accept an older startup?
Oh, we accept startups of all kinds. Like I said, half of them are not launched, half of them are launched. A small number of them are making lots of revenue. Some of them have raised funding before and some of them haven't. I think it might sound surprising, but we say no to lots of companies who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in revenue. The reason we say no is that that's not growing. It's not growing. It's been steady for a long time, and they're not figuring out how to kind of break out. And loss of revenue at the same level of a long period of time is kind of an indication that you've hit something that you can't seem to break out of. Sometimes we can help with that, sometimes we can't. So revenue is not a strong indicator unless it's a very short amount of time that revenue has been created, I think, because that says something about the demand for that product. But there is no specific criteria for what we're looking for. The one thing I would say is if you have sold a large portion of your company and you have raised a lot of money, then there's still value to YC, but the value probably eventually diminish. And like if you raise a Series A, doing YC does not make any sense most of the time.
So the next question is I guess, related to fundraising and YC. Someone in the audience asked, why did you decide to apply to YC instead of directly going to the VCs themselves?
Yeah, so we applied to YC, as I mentioned from my story earlier. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't related to being able to fundraise later. We had raised a pre-seed round earlier. We were looking for the less financial benefits of YC. Of course, we took full advantage of the financial benefits, but we did speak to VCs here, and as I mentioned again earlier, the drive to think big helps a lot to help you fundraise. So the way you think, the way you approach your company changes through the program, and that helps you to fundraise better than if you didn't do it.
Well, for me, I got brainwashed by one of the alumni. I met one of the alumni, and he spoke about very, very good thing about YC, and it is good. It is true. But before I met him, I don't know about YC. I don't know what the hell is YC. I don't know what is accelerator. I don't even know about it. So because I got brainwashed, I tried to apply and got accepted. Now I do the brainwash.
Yeah, so the next question, sorry, I'm still a little bit riled up. So specifically for startups in Indonesia, a question from the audience, are you looking for a set of different criteria than you would look for in Silicon Valley startups?
No, I think it's very clear that there are thousands of products, potentially, or at least 1,000 in this country that will make a big company. Just focus on this country. This is almost 300 million people, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, almost the same population as the US. This is absolutely a large enough market to build most things. Now you got to think about, okay, what are the things that will be unique to this country and what are the things that won't? And there are some things that it will be directly competitive with foreign companies. It's going to be hard to build a new messaging product for Indonesia. That's going to be hard. WhatsApp is ingrained in everything here. It's going to be hard to build a new online ad network just for Indonesia because Google and Facebook are pretty good here. But there are lots of things that are unique to this country that the foreign companies have no idea how to do. And I think both of your companies are examples of that. And we look for all of those ideas. And we are not afraid of making bets or investment in markets where there are no other investors. Like we have funded, I think, 10 companies in Nigeria. We're probably the most active investor in Africa at this point. Funded in all kinds of countries in Africa. And you're like, why would you do that? Well, Africa is just 10 years, Africa is 10 years behind Indonesia. Like in terms of the financial literacy, it's very easy to see in 10 years that you have 500 million people in Africa having a mobile bank account on their phone. Like that's very easy to see. So why wouldn't want to fund those founders who wants to do that in those markets? And the foreign companies won't prioritize some of the countries until much later. So great companies are built by great founders. If they're technical and they know the market and the market is big enough, we want to fund them. It's very simple. It's not that complicated.
Okay. So I think there are quite a few questions here regarding funding/valuation. What does YC get in exchange from successful startups they've incubated? Equity, shares, and how much?
So YC have a standard deal. It's $150,000 for 7%. It's been almost the same for, like it was 120 before, but it's been the same for about 5 years or 7 years. In return for that, I think founders can expect. It's hard to disentangle. Like obviously, the data suggests that founders do really well at demo day. So typically, they raise somewhere between 1 and 3 million. They sell 15% of the company, and they do well. It's hard to say exactly what is that. Why does that happen? Like most of the reasons we would say we're good at picking the right founders who are good, and those founders get funded. That's what we would like to say. We also like to say we're helpful, and there's something that we're doing to make those founders better, especially the ones that haven't launched. And better could be a combination of things, not just product advice, it can be communication advice. And there's something to the investor community in Silicon Valley. They're mostly angel investors and seed investors that come to demo day. There are over 1,000 of them. Most of them have worked for big companies or funded companies themselves. They have this experience. They are not uncle and aunts, doctors, bankers. These are founders of tech companies that invest in them. And typically those are the kind of investors that you want to have on board. So I think as a founder, you are making some calculation of sort of like what's the pros and the cons there. I think it wouldn't dramatically change if we increase the amount we invested a lot, I think. I think the dilution of the 7% is the thing you should keep in mind. But here's the truth. Like when I see companies applying for most around the world, they're not raising a seed round and selling 15%. They're doing what I did. They're sold 30%, 35%. That means the next round you've sold half of your company. And that's mostly the reality. Maybe not for some founders, but for most founders, that's the reality, is you're not raising your seed round on 15%. So I think with that in mind, the cost of YC is usually worth it because it does help you to get to that point. That would be my best answer. Like this is not necessarily true for a second-time founder in Silicon Valley who knows everyone. For them, there might be another path that's much better. But YC would like to say, you don't need to know anyone at YC to apply to YC. You just apply on the website, just like you apply to university. You don't need to know anyone. There's no special relationship. Like it is helpful to know an alumni, but really you don't have to. And we want to keep it that way. We don't want, some investors say, oh, if you can't network yourself as an investor, then you're not going to be able to start the company. That's very easy to say if you're in the United States. You network yourself as an investor. If you're somewhere else, it's not that easy. Like I grew up in Sweden. There was no investors in my hometown. Didn't know anybody. So like I think it's too easy to say. And I think the internet have lowered the barrier of a lot of things, and our goal was to lower the barrier of funding startups, and I think that's what we did.
Cool. So some general questions to the founders. The audience asks, how do you find co-founders? How do you know when these people are the right ones? And if you did not choose to get co-founders, why not?
So I have two co-founders. Essentially, how we came together is a little bit of a funny story. So I met Peter. I've known Peter for 8 years, and we've kind of stayed in touch. And we were talking about trading crypto back in 2017, and you know, kind of stayed in touch through that. So when we met up for a drink and over lots and lots of wine, we decided that we wanted to start a company together, and we kind of knew that it wanted to be. We knew the mission that we wanted to achieve. We didn't know exactly the form that it would take, but we knew that mission. And I'd been talking to my other co-founder, Norman, for a while, and we knew that we wanted to work together as well, because we really kind of got along, and we were able to build off each other's energies. So when we figured out what we wanted to build, me and Peter and Norman kind of fit the bill as the technical co-founder that we needed who could build the product. So the team kind of just came together. It wasn't a concerted effort to say, I want to go find co-founders to do X for us.
Yeah, I think finding a co-founder is a long process. It is like finding a soulmate, because because you will be together for a long time, facing all kinds of shit. Me and my co-founders, I have two more co-founders. We came from the same MBA schools, and yeah, we've been through a bankruptcy once. This is Inform is my second company. My first company has already broke down, already dead. I built that company with the same co-founders, so we know everything about each other, and we know our limit, and we respect that. So so far, because going through that bankruptcy has been a very maturing process for all of us, and I know my co-founders' limit, and they know my limit. So we do our part every day, and that's how we complete all of ourselves and doing Eden very, very well. Yeah, and it's a very long and maturing process. You cannot just pick one to be co-founders. No, you need a very long process.
Any tips and tricks from you? So the next question that's super interesting is actually about profits. I know in the early stages, we had a startup. That's not really our main focus, right? It's all about growth, getting your next fundraising, getting the valuation up and up. So I think this question is really interesting in terms of at what point should we start thinking about profitability as a startup?
I think from day one, from
Awesome.
from day zero. So this is the difference between YC and other investors or other company. They taught us about profitability from day one. So we have to use our capital as efficient as possible and reach profitability as fast as possible. Because when you do next fundraising, when you're profitable, you will be in a very strong place, and you will have a bargaining power.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think unit economics is important to make work when you're designing your business or when you're trying to figure it out. You don't want to be in a position where, and you don't want to be in a position where you need money. You've got 3 months of runway left, and then you get a raw deal.
There are two lies that founders tell themselves, even in YC. The first one is, as long as I am growing, eventually unit economics will work itself out. Lie number one, it never happens. You need to fix them when you're small. And the second thing is, it doesn't matter if the users I'm buying through marketing aren't worth this much right now, they will be worth that much in the future. Also not true and impossible to verify. So I used to say all online marketing spend on acquiring customers that isn't profitable is just an experiment. You need to make sure that you're making the money back in the accounting things. The moment that that's true, you can scale online marketing to be massive. But until you're making the money back from the use you're acquiring online, it's just an experiment.
Okay, cool. Here's a super interesting question. Sorry to be veering away a little bit from our previous topic. What are some startups that YC passed on that end up being successful?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I did the math the other day. There are about half as many $100 million companies that we passed on as we funded. So that's like 50 or 60 of them, I think, that we passed on. Now, the more interesting question is, why did we pass on them? Most of the time, we passed on them I think for the reasons that we pass on companies anyway, like 2 non-technical co-founders, product not launched, not domain experts. Every now and then, they will figure it out and build a massive company, and we will not be able to see it, and then we'll pass on them, and they'll go and do it. But it's very rare that we pass on 2 technical co-founders with domain expertise that are about to launch something. Like, very rarely do we pass on that. Like, we definitely want to dig in, and it's like, can these people build something? But it's inevitable that we will pass on companies, and the most dangerous things with investors or being an investor is it's worse for you to pass on things than to accept things in some sense. Like, we'd rather fund a few more companies to getting a chance to get started than too few. And it's just a little complicated to figure these things out. And we try to build the most predictive process as we can, and we have every application being read by multiple people. We try to figure out if there are patterns in an application that lead to good outcomes. Like, we know the technical founders is one of them. We know that launching early is one of them. We know that being a domain expert typically is one of them. But there are things that we can't figure out, and some of the companies that became big, we did not even invite to interviews, and some of them we interviewed multiple times and still didn't fund. So we definitely screw up a lot.
But also successful a lot, so that's good balance. This is a question for the founders, so for Rohit and David. On the early days especially, what were the conflicts that arose between you and your co-founders? And what would be your tip to avoid this from happening to other founders?
Oh, where do I start? There were not so much conflicts in terms of what we wanted to build. I think there were conflicts in how we would approach things. But what I would say kind of got us through is the fact that we all respect each other's opinions. So we were able to say, okay, if you have what seems like a completely dumbass idea, which I have a lot of, my co-founders would say, okay, let's go test it. And sometimes they worked out, sometimes they didn't. And then we learned from each other there. So, and we learned to keep ourselves accountable. Of course, conflict arises, especially when you're living 3 months in the middle of nowhere. In a single house. So conflict arises, but I think what keeps us going is that we know we're actually friends. Like, we enjoy working together, and you know, we've had a discussion. We had this discussion even before we raised $1. If nothing works out, what we know is that we actually want to work together, and that keeps you going through.
Yeah, well, we were having a lot of conflict back then at my first venture, my first company. I think what caused it is, knowing myself now, sometimes I can be very dominant and very demanding, and I hope now I'm no longer doing that. But back then, what caused conflict is when something didn't work out well, and we wanted to work out so bad, and we ended up fighting and blaming each other. I think the tips is to keep having a cool mind. Like things will break down when you move fast. Things will break down. People make mistakes. Me and my co-founders always makes mistake every day, and sometimes when you lose a lot of money, things can get pretty tense. But it's okay. It is a startup life. It is not for everyone, but yeah, as a founders and co-founders, you know the risk of doing a startup is you can lose a lot of money. You can be in a situation which is very, very confusing and very disoriented. Yeah, it's normal. So after that maturing process of bankruptcy, yeah, we think shit happens. So what?
Just to add to that, so one thing that we've kind of kept from the beginning, and we think is really important, is that we communicate openly. So like I've told my co-founders, and they've told me multiple times, like you messed up, right, in much more colorful language. So we're really open about that, and the way that we deliver it is not judgment, right? It's hey, I don't think you should have done this. This is why I don't think so, and I'm open to discussing it if you disagree. And we found that it works really well. So no matter who is in charge of that, like if it's a product issue, or it's a tech issue, or something else, we communicate freely, and we're able to give feedback like that. And I think that works well when it goes across the company as well.
Any ground rules you set for yourselves in terms of, hey, do we sleep on it? Do we have to hash it out now? I mean, sometimes there's no choice, right? Yeah, any like set in stone, you know, if this happens, then X person gets to make the call.
Yeah, I think essentially we try to be collaborative, and we take in feedback, but where we've set the drawn the line in the sand is that if it's a technical issue, like I have very little to weigh in on, so our CTO makes the call. If it's a product issue, and you know it's related to, like, Peter's spoken to more customers than I have, so I can't really say that I can make a better call than him in that regard. But in terms of strategy, then that's where I come in. So we have pretty clear lines in the sand, and our skill sets are pretty complementary. So that's where we do it. That's the way that we do it. No ground rules in terms of, like, you know, have to make the call now or sleeping on it. We try to, I mean, you can't predict stuff. Yeah.
Well, ground rules for me and my co-founders is don't bring our wives in. When we fight, keep it between ourselves. Because our
wives fight too, otherwise.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I think what Rohit told is also true, is knowing our limit. The way I divide responsibilities between me and my co-founders is I'm the CEO, my co-founders is the CFO and the COO. So all of the financial decisions, I leave it to my co-founders. Even sometimes I didn't agree with him, but yeah, he knew better, because he is in that execution area, so he knew better. And about the operations also, when things start to break down, yeah, shit happens. And if he is the one who do it every day, still making things that broke, I will, if I'm in his position, I will do the same. So I help where I can, and sometimes we solve things together. Like if you go too deep into the execution level, sometimes you cannot see the bigger picture, and that's where I have to come in and pull them back. See the something like, is the organization structure is already correct? Is the people already put in the right place or not? That's my job. Yeah, I think just keep it within our boundaries.
So we have a former MB employee. Her name is Amy Bickler. She's now a founder coach for YC Founder. She sometimes give a talk at YC. She talked about personality traits for founders and why it's really important to know how you deal with stress and conflict beforehand. And she talked about how there are multiple different personality traits. One of them is the avoidant co-founder, who when there's a stressful situation is just kind of like walk away and pretend like it's not going to happen. And then you have other co-founders, just like the confrontational one, is like want to deal with it right now. If you don't know what your co-founders are, figure that out before this conflict arises, because that will make you understand so much more about their behavior during that conflict. Like, I'm an avoidant co-founder. I will probably walk away if there's thing, and I'll have them hash it out. If my co-founder knows that makes it easier for them to understand my behavior. Vice versa. One of my technical co-founders, he was the confrontational one. He just wanted to deal with the issue right away. And then I know that like he's not like scary. This is just his way of dealing with stress, is he wants to deal with it right away. So I think you want to figure that out early on what personality type are you, because that'll help you understand each other when you have these conflicts, because they will come.
Great. I think we only have room for one more question. So I think one person asked, what's next after YC? Are there any follow-up programs for startups?
Yeah, so we run experiments a lot. So if things don't work out, we shut them down. So we ran an experiment with we call it a Series A batch, where we had companies apply and be part of a batch. And it turned out there wasn't the perfect way of executing that thing. We wanted to kind of run another YC program to run another sort of like YC-like experience. It didn't work out the way we planned. So what we instead do is we have a continuous Series A process. And we just wrote this I don't know if you guys have seen it, a 70-page guide on how to raise a Series A. And we put it live on our internal alumni book face for all the founders. And every year, about 100 companies or more will raise a Series A. And hopefully they'll start with a guide. And basically, we try to write down all of our advice there. And then we have now what we call Series A group office hours, where if you think you're ready for Series A or you want to know what the goals are for your company, then come to one of the group office hours. And we have 5 companies and 3 partners every week, and you can just sign up for them if you're a YC company. And we'll tell you in your face if we think you're ready or not. And we'll tell you, if you're ready, how to deal with it. And sometimes people come because they get inbound interest from Series A investors, and we'll tell you how to deal with that. We also launched 2 years ago our growth program, which is specifically focused on companies that are scaling their executive team. So it's a dinner program for 10 weeks for YC companies, focusing on how do you build an exec team? What are the scaling challenges? Like Xendit are growing really fast. There's like things that are only true for companies that are between 100 and 500 people. And that's what that program is for. I believe actually Moses went through the program. Yeah. So CEOs go through the program. And then I mentioned Startup School, which is a really important thing for us. We always try to use software to solve some of the problems. So the number one problem that YC companies are asking us for help about is engineering hiring. So we launched this thing called Work at a Startup, which is any engineer who want to work at a startup can apply, and we'll put them in touch with the best matching YC companies that are hiring. In return, we promote this on Hacker News, which is one of the larger kind of nerd hack tech news website in the world, and our homepage and everywhere we get inbound. I believe that there are 52 or more engineers being placed at YC companies every month today from Work at a Startup. Our goal is to get to hundreds per month, so that when you join YC, we can confidently say we helped you place your first 3 or 4 engineering hires just automatically just through the software. So those are some of the things we're doing. Startup School is a really big focus for us right now. It's been very, very successful. The amount of companies, I mean, we know that there were 5,000 to 10,000 companies that launched through Startup School this summer. And how many of them would have launched anyway? I don't know, but that must be good for the world.
Awesome, great. I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you for our panelists.
Thank you so much for Xendit for arranging this, organizing this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What we call pesan sponsor in Indonesian. First things first, it's not too late to apply to YCOM. So there's the link right there, or you can contact Gustaf. I believe he gave his email address already. Also, if you feel like now you've been deterred from starting a startup, I mean, you want to work for one instead, we're hiring. So there you go. There's the website for that too.